Hi guys, number one Marmaduke fan here. The last time I talked about the Riddler, I talked about three Riddler stories, two from the Dick Sprang era, and one from the Silver Age era, written by Gardner Fox. I kind of like the idea of doing maybe like three stories at a time, briefly. And part of the reason I'm doing this series is I think that these kinds of books, like these greatest hits books, are one of the best types of comics you can give to a kid to get them into comics. Like if you got like a giant treasury of every Batman story ever, that would be really cool and really expensive, but it may not necessarily be the best like vehicle of introducing a kid to Batman or Batman's best villains. But what's beautiful about these is a kid can read it in, a week or two and really just get a survey of the gradual development of art in comics, where Dick Sprang was really cartoony. He was really marked by very fun, over the top ideas. And then what you see in throughout the 60s era is a lot of, they owe a great debt to Dick Sprang and Bill Finger and Bob Kane. But they're just trying to maybe like continue that. So I don't see the Silver Age as remarkably different from the Golden Age. Obviously, there were like differences for things like horror comics, but superhero comics seem to kind of like adjust to the comics code of authority pretty well, because they were always for little kids. They were all, maybe there'd be like a little suggestive humor or a scary monster or something, but they were always very kid friendly. What was interesting about these next three stories I read, let's see here, The Riddler's Robberies of the Riddler, The Riddler's Prison Puzzle Problem, and The Testimony of the Riddler, is you can see some real artistic development starting to happen. You can kind of see Gardner Fox playing with different ideas, like what do we do with a character who leaves riddles for Batman? And you can see the influence of Neil Adams on everybody else. So I looked at this one, The Testimony of the Riddler from 1977. I thought, man, that feels a little Neil Adams-y. So I looked up Neil Adams' bibliography, and sure enough, he started doing Batman stories in 1970, and boom, you can start to see the ripple effect happening in comics. So let's see. This first one, The Riddler's Robberies of the Riddler, I call it sort of maybe like Gardner Fox he keeps trying different things. So the last time he tried having Riddler lead Batman on a wild goose chase, where it seemed like Riddler was committing a crime, but he actually wasn't committing a crime, and he kept embarrassing Batman. This gets into some of some pretty sympathetic psychology for the Riddler, where he's compulsive. He can't help but leave a riddle for Batman, which wasn't something that was necessarily true in the Dick Sprang comics, but Fox is clearly trying to think of a direction to take this character, and the idea that he literally can't do it, he literally can't help himself, is an interesting direction. It makes him flawed, and Riddler has this bright idea that he will try to overcome his failings. There's some all of the comics from this era, the action would be really comedic and ludicrous. Like they put wax on their shoes and they slide down the escalator, and it's great. And eventually what Riddler figures out is, okay, he thinks that he's cured himself, but then odd things start happening. Weird people start showing up and saying unusual riddles. So Batman requests the general public to call him if they see anything odd. This is a great comics out of context moment. At a wedding, the district attorney himself is on hand to see a wedding present of 15 cents to the bride and a dime to the groom. This seems odd enough to call Batman about. I love the comic books from this era so much. They're so weird. What it turns out is that even though Riddler thinks he's kicked his habit, he can't help himself. Subconsciously, he still leaves clues for the Batman. This cover, I like the cover artist for this. It was interesting that the cover artists were all done by different people during this era. I was used to the cover art always being done by the interior artist. So the Riddler's Prison Puzzle Problem, covered by Irv Novick. Kind of like heavy black, emphasizing like the, hey kids, Batman's going to be in prison. Why will that be? So this one, let me get the penciler and inker's name for the prison problem. The pencils are by Frank Springer, and the inker is Sid Green. And already you can see development. Like this is a completely different type of comic than the Dick Sprang era. They're bringing in angles into the panels. They're having extreme foreshortening with Batman using the ruler to open the book. They're using some close-up shots of the hands and some, like different angles, like from behind her head. Really, really pretty girls. I think you're starting to see maybe the influence of the Marvel era of comics. What's it? Trickling. Man, I had a brain fart there. Trickling over into the not brand Eck comics. But it was really dynamic. There's a lot of, like fun poses. They're clearly like getting in a mirror and pushing it to the extreme. Batman, I noticed that they had Batman like name his judo move, the Yoko Wakare, and they loved having like Batman slam criminals' heads together and fly into them with his fists and kick them over his head in this era. But look at this panel. Like, they're really pushing everything to the extreme in this era, and it's just noticeably different. The next story, well, it's a similar vein. Wait a second, where am I? Okay, I want to actually jump ahead. Here we go. So one about the Riddler being compulsive. Oh yeah, the whole theme of the story was that the Riddler got the bright idea that he can still leave Batman a clue, but he'll do something ridiculous to not make it obvious where the clue is or what it is. This one I really want to talk about. So this is from the 70s. It's the testimony of the Riddler, and the cover is by Jim Aparo, who had become the standard Batman artist for the Nightfall era. And you can tell he's a lot younger, a lot less experienced back then, but he's still got a lot of sharpness and a lot of, creepy dynamism to his style. I think a lot of the best Batman artists brought an element of creepiness and mystique to the character. So the one thing I don't like about this story, the testimony of the Riddler, is it's not a good standalone story. It's a part of series where all the criminals are boasting that someone has killed the Batman, and they're holding a trial to determine who gets the honor of claiming to be the murderer of the Batman. And this is like the second in a series of stories. Like there was a Catwoman one before this, there's a Luthor one after this. So you never solve the mystery of who killed Batman or if he's really dead. But what's interesting about this is everything, the stakes keep getting cranked up. So by the 70s, Riddler kills a man to leave a clue to Batman. So he's becoming a little less of a fun, cartoony, Bugs Bunny type of character, and he's becoming more of a silly but a genuine threat to Batman. Batman is hyper-muscular, and especially when he shows up to handle some criminals, you can see how he's in shadow. He's hyper-muscular. The Riddler kind of sells with the purple prose what a good job Batman is doing of just taking all these thugs out, even though it's still kind of like the cartoony, somersaulty fighting style of the old era. It's continuous with the old Batman stories. What made Batman Batman? He's fighting bad guys, he's flipping around and doing cool, crazy kicks and tackles. But the Neil Adams influence is making them be a little bit more serious about making him ominous, making him look strong, making him like an imposing figure. They also really emphasize the Riddler's hatred for Batman. Oh, by the way, is that a JoJo reference? Yeah. Psychologically, it's interesting because Riddler's been like a goofy guy leaving riddles, and now it's clear that he just freaking hates Batman. He wants Batman to suffer. And so he has this cool, really tragic thing where he like locks up, collapses a bunch of stones on Batman. By the way, the riddles are better too. Like he leaves a riddle that Batman thinks, oh, okay, that's telling me to go to the church because what does a hunter look for? A hunter looks for prey, so I'll go to the church because that's where you pray. And then it turns out that really the Riddler was talking about going to the quarry because the hunter looks for their quarry. So sometimes the riddles in the old story, it'd be like, that doesn't really make sense to me, but this riddle, the double meaning actually made sense. They worked a little bit to have that riddle have some significance. And when he has Batman trapped under rock, he's sort of like mocking him, he's laughing at him, and he claims that that's how he killed the Batman. He blew him up. Then there's like this whole really interesting thing where Two-Face, who's the prosecutor for the criminals, he accuses the Riddler of lying and just making it up so he can get the glory for killing Batman, and he finds a way to wheedle the truth out of the Riddler. And it's kind of based in science. It's sort of like in cartoons, if you light a stick of dynamite on fire, but in real life, you don't. A stick of dynamite won't explode just because you burn it up in a fire, and that's how Two-Face saw through the Riddler's lie. Now, the problem with this story is it leaves me off on a cliffhanger, doesn't tell me what happened. But man, these are so great for just getting a feel for that development. Can you see it? Can you kind of see what I'm talking about? I love Sprang. He's really cartoony. He's really fun. He's really inventive. But it's very much a cartoonist's art. It's very simple. uh, it's not super realistic. And then it gradually starts seeing maybe a little bit more energy in the angles, a little bit more dynamism in the punches and stuff. And then by the time Neil Adams shows up, there's all this emphasis on drama and, beautifully illustrated, handsome men and beautiful women and dynamism. It's great. So the evolution of comics is what you get when you read books like this. That's enough. The point's been made. I'll keep reading the Riddler stories. This is a great buy. I just wish they didn't have made like the criminal trial story like its own separate trade paperback, because I don't think it works very well. It's just an independent, read it all by itself story, but fantastic. Number one Marmaduke fan, like, comment, subscribe, click the bell to receive notifications, check out my subscribe star. I love you guys. I'll catch you later.